publisher who can't get on mainstream media, who are closer to the truth than anyone else.
Let me ask you this. Obama's now decided he's going to send some 38,000 more troops to Afghanistan, which is going to put the American military contingent there something around 100,000. This seems to be a manifest absurdity from the point of view of history. Not even Alexander the Great, not even the Soviet Union could conquer Afghanistan. What in God's name are we doing there, Greg?
Protecting heroin trafficking business and profits from that, and the destruction of Western societies by heroin trafficking from Afghanistan. 95% of the heroin that gets into Britain comes from Afghanistan. NATO is the big transporter of Afghanistan, and it was Lord George Robertson, who was the Secretary General of Afghanistan, who pleaded for air-to-air refueling for NATO aircraft, so they didn't have to drop off somewhere like Germany and pay a huge customs tax on the heroin as they put into Britain. So NATO has taken over the CIA as the big heroin trafficker. So Lord George Robertson was the pedophile minder in the Thomas Hamilton Dump Lane massacre, where 26 were killed. And then we had Japta Hoop Schaefer, who actually brought 10 kilograms of heroin into New Zealand, gave it to Helen Clark, and she gave it to a minister called Annette King, and Annette King gave it to the police, and then Annette King was made the Minister of Police. And then the police distributed it to the gangs. Police then distributed the heroin to the gangs. And I met one of the gang members, and I was talking to him about it, and he said that he refused to transport the heroin. And so what happened then is that 6 police came in, and they cut through his garage door with a skill saw, and came in and interviewed him, which meant that the six cops were surrounding him. 2 cops turned away as the police officers searched his pockets and planted coconut. So it goes from Afghanistan to NATO to leaders of countries, and if you transport the heroin, you're promoted. And so Annette King became Minister of Police and the Minister of Justice. And then when this gang member didn't want to traffic the heroin, which was free, by the way, the heroin was free in order to establish a market, he was harassed by the police for not dealing heroin, for not being a heroin dealer.
Greg, I can believe everything you've just said easily. What worries me is the role of Obama in all of this. He was such a wonderful promise of hope and change in his campaign, and now he's come into office. He hasn't done so many of the things he promised to do. He hasn't repealed the Patriot Act. He hasn't repealed the Military Commissions Act. He is doing something about Guantanamo. He is bringing some of the accused, and I believe they are all falsely accused, to New York. And it's going to be an opportunity for the public to pay attention to 9/11 again. I see opportunities there for, creating public focus on some of the absurdities of the official account of 9/11. But is Obama nothing but a sop? Is he nothing but a puppet of Israel and the Mossad?
Yeah, well, his chief of staff is a high-ranking Mossad agent, and he's got
Emanuel, yes. I'm worried about Rahm Emanuel. I've also worried that he didn't replace the Secretary of Defense, and he didn't replace the head of the FBI, and he seems to have been very slow about replacing Bush-Cheney appointees, which makes me think we have an administration that might be described as Bush-Cheney light.
Yeah, what you've got now is a black friendlier face for the same administration. And there's a theory that there's only one party in New Zealand, it's one party in America, and that's the Republican Party. And even if the Democrats get in, it's still Republican.
Well, I'm very troubled that he hasn't done things that I expected him to do. Healthcare, I don't understand why he didn't pursue it aggressively in the first 3 months of his administration when he had the most political capital. As Lyndon Johnson observed, every decision he makes costs him support by the public because somebody's going to disagree with it. So if you have a major undertaking like healthcare, you have to do it immediately.
Yeah, but the idea, like I said, if you take the view that the President of the United States is actually a pirate captain, then all of their history fits into place. It's the destruction of the health system. It's taking over other countries and stealing their assets and bombing the snot out of them, and it is depopulating the planet. These guys are pirate captains. We should stop calling them presidents and prime ministers. They're pirate captains of the British plantation, which is controlled by Israel. As I said, like the New Zealand judiciary is totally controlled by Israel.
How has Israel come to exercise such massive control over the world? Has it all been through economic, financial ingenuity? Or, and what's the explanation here?
A collection of sexual secrets.
Sexual secrets?
Yeah. So my latest series of books, it's a 3-volume set, about 1,400 pages in total, A4 full colour. So they're massive coffee table books of intelligence crime solving. And it's called The Sex Collectors, How the World Was Run on Shame. The first one's stitch-ups, the second one is murders, and the third one's heroin trafficking. And what I've discovered is that prominent people who generally have the title honourable are the murderers and the heroin traffickers, and they're usually running countries or running judiciaries or running the police.
So those with the titles of honourable are among the most dishonourable.
Yeah. Well, you can tell a pedophiles they always demand respect, and the courts often give them respect because the courts are a pedophile movement. So you get...
And you're saying that's true not just of the New Zealand courts, but of the American courts as well?
Yeah. And so the thing about pedophilia is it holds the most shame, therefore it's got the most control over judges and lawyers and Queen's Counsel and politicians, prime ministers. So deliberately
promoting and emplacing pedophiles in high position is a way to control them.
Yeah. Like if you take Gerald Ford, he was actually Mr. Lynch King, who was a porn king. He was a massive porn magnate, and he became the president of the United States. Gerald Ford. So he was under a completely false name and a completely false history and a completely false identity, and through porn, he managed to become the president of the United States.
Gerald Ford.
Look it up. If you go to Wikipedia and look up Gerald Ford, it's there on Wikipedia.
But don't you agree that Wikipedia itself is an intelligence op?
It is in some ways, but it's still a great source of information.
I mean, for example,
some of it's wrong, but most of it is incredibly accurate and informative.
After I founded Scholars for 9/11 Truth, I discovered that Wikipedia had an extremely biased, distorted history of the society, which I sought to correct repeatedly, and the editors wouldn't allow me to do it, even though I had founded the society and knew its history better than anyone else.
Yeah. Like when I put my entry into Wikipedia under my name, I had a brief history. And it started off with a disambiguation. I wasn't Greg Hallett, the whiteware salesman. I wasn't Greg Hallett, the car salesman, and I wasn't Greg Hallett, the greenie activist. And they took all that off, and they just left a list of published books. And I had quite a few pages there of background. And they said, it's unproven. So they are an intelligence operation. But one of the things I'd like to talk about. Have we got like 10 minutes left?
Less. We got about 3.
3. Okay, I want to talk about the CIA takeover of Auckland.
Go ahead.
Now, the CIA invested their money for Antarctica with Bernie Madoff, and they lost it. And Wigram Air Base in Christchurch in the South Island of New Zealand is the leaping point to Antarctica. So because the CIA had lost their money for the investment of Antarctica, they're currently taking over Auckland, the city of 1.4 million people, which is essentially 4 cities joined together. It's one of the largest cities in the world. It takes about an hour to drive through it on a motorway. And they want to steal $28 billion worth of infrastructure assets in Auckland. And the way they're doing this